Hi, welcome back to our podcast series, After DeepSeek. Last time we looked at the foundation of China's technological advancement, a vast community of engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs. In this episode, we ask, how did the release of DeepSeek R1 model in January 2025 change the rules of China's artificial intelligence game, technically, economically, and geopolitically? We will look at the new reality of this after DeepSeek era and at the innovations around AI efficiency and self-reliance. The R1 model challenged the assumption that only American companies with massive computing resources can achieve world-class AI. We are here to unpack that fundamental shift.
This is episode 2 of our 3-part tech podcast series, After DeepSeek, a tech cast from the South China Morning Post. I am an AI-generated voice, a product of the very technology we are about to discuss.
And I'm your host, Zhou Xin, the Post's tech editor. The arrival of the fully open-source DeepSeek R1 model has been called China's Sputnik moment.
The first to say this was Silicon Valley entrepreneur Marc Andreessen. He used the analogy to underline that the launch of DeepSeek's advanced reasoning model posed a significant challenge to American AI dominance, much like the former Soviet Union's launch of the Sputnik satellite did to the U.S. space program in 1957.
This man stands on the threshold of outer space. It's the biggest story of the year, possibly the #1 story of the century. This launching of the Russian satellite, which brings into the realm of possibility all those wild science fiction stories of interplanetary travel.
The point is that China's tech seems to be thriving after DeepSeek's release.
Yeah, so I think DeepSeek did mark a turning point in the world's awareness of China's technological progress. And also, domestically within China, it was, in a way, its own sort of wake-up moment as well.
That is Cao Chen. I've called him to understand more about new rules of the AI game.
Cao Chen is a PhD fellow at the John L. Thornton China Center of the Brookings Institution. With prior research roles at institutions including Princeton University and the RAND Corporation, Chen is a heavyweight in the study of China's tech and industrial policy.
DeepSeek is sort of the tip of the iceberg for a lot of trends that have been going on actually for years, maybe even decades now, that are now kind of breaking through the surface. I think 2025 has been the year where it has been much more visible, and now people are asking the question, not can China innovate, but how does China innovate? And what is driving all of these breakthroughs or rapid progress in so many different sectors at the same time?
Do you believe, Kyle, that U.S. policy of cutting off China's access to high-end chips, particularly those from NVIDIA, may have backfired and forced China to accelerate its self-sufficiency and innovations?
There's a lot of different voices in this debate, but one thing that I would point out is the ways in which this strategy of export controls can, and I think has now proven itself to help reinforce and accelerate some aspects of China's self-sufficiency push. Some folks, might argue that, okay, China has always been pursuing self-reliance, that they, for example, launched this national semiconductor program back in 2014, even before Made in China in 2025. Long before the 2022 export controls on NVIDIA chips to China, long before the harsher set of entity lists and other U.S. actions on Huawei and ZTE, for example. So you could argue that China has been pursuing, semiconductors for many years. And actually, I would go even much further back than that. But contrary to maybe some other folks, I think that the export controls do have an impact on both accelerating in terms of motivation, China's push for chip self-reliance, and in terms of actually accelerating the whole process and by creating this sort of closed off Chinese ecosystem.
The U.S. focuses massive investments in AGI and superscalers, as opposed to China, where the focus is on integrating AI into daily products like cars, toys, machines. Some predict China will be the AI winner because its products have a direct, real-world impact on everyday life, while the American AGI systems lack the practical application. What's your take on this?
Now it seems like almost the entire US economy is being built around this single giant bet
Exactly.
that that we only invest, billions, if not tens of billions of dollars more in data center infrastructure and continue to train ever larger and ever more sophisticated foundation models, that we will reach that point of AGI, of artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence, where you have an AI system that can do all the work that humans can do, and maybe even more, and maybe even better, and maybe even reach this sort of self-improving takeoff point where the AI writes its own code and trains its own next version and makes itself better and better. And so it's sort of interesting because you just don't hear that kind of talk very much in China's AI industry. Everything is much more sort of nuts and bolts, how to win over users, how to provide sort of better healthcare services, integrate AI into education. Definitely a huge push in manufacturing and, industrial automation, autonomous driving, AI in cars. So it's much more sort of focused on immediate practical applications in China. There's such a strong contrast right now between how both countries are going about AI.
What will be the next wave of major innovations happening in China's tech?
While humanoids have gotten all the attention, the whole industrial robotics space is a really interesting one to watch. Biotech is another huge one. China has now a thriving private space industry, and then definitely autonomous vehicles is another huge one that you're seeing progress right now from a number of major Chinese startups. But there's a lot of areas to watch for sure.
China's massive production power is recognized globally, and it's now also the tech powerhouse. Yet we see increasing domestic concerns, weak consumption, middle-class job anxiety, and millions trapped in the gig economy. Is this really sustainable?
Yeah, so this is the big question right now because you really have sort of a two-track economic picture right now. I think about this in two ways. One is that I do think that in the long run, probably what China's facing is maybe not so different from what we're seeing in other countries, especially developed countries, where there are increasingly large gains for a limited number of people connected to technology. And then another big question is also, will China be able to deal with its demographic issue with a shrinking workforce and a higher dependency ratio over time, with this bet on productivity, on increasing productivity through technology? Whatever happens, it's probably safe to say that the era of high speed growth is over. And so now China's searching and trying to bet on what the next phase might look like.
Let's look at this next phase. We invited Professor Hongxia Yang to our podcast studio. I would like to discuss her expert take on the accelerating AI developments and hear about some of the latest innovations. This will be a bit more technical.
Yeah, thanks for Xin for your invitation here.
Dr. Yang is the Associate Dean at the Faculty of Computing and Mathematical Sciences of Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Her career bridges elite academia and leading industry roles with IBM, Yahoo, ByteDance, and Alibaba, which, by the way, owns the South China Morning Post. Professor Yang recently launched the startup Infibex AI.
Professor Yang's early work was important. She helped Alibaba and ByteDance build their foundational modeling teams even before the generative AI boom. So that was long before the public excitement of models like ChatGPT.
It was a very hard time. But in those days, in all those tech giants, both in US and in China as well, actually, those companies, they want to cut some cost, but still they want to maintain all the performances. In Chinese, it's called 降本增效.
That means lower the cost, improve efficiency. So, in those lean years, innovation was forced to happen with limited computing resources. This scarcity drove a search for efficiency. Professor Yang's team, for instance, drew inspiration from the transformer model developed by Google in 2017.
Google's DeepMind and search team designed the transformer together, and they launched the first version of the generative AI model, so-called BERT, in their search engine. They achieved great success.
That term, BERT-based models, refers to a type of transformer model that excels at understanding context in a sentence, a core capability of the large language models we see today.
Now, Professor Yang, please tell us, where are we now in AI development?
Okay, so in my opinion, actually, I divide the development of the current generation of AI to be 3 stages. The first stage is from 0 to 1. That's definitely the birth of Transformer that was launched by Google in 2017. The second stage, from 1 to 10, actually, I would consider 2 very important events. The first event is definitely the launch of ChatGPT, GPT-4, the October of 2022. The other event, in my opinion, would be the BERT-based, search engine to replace every engine of Google, because this is actually really very challenging for such giant company to replace a model universally with that high traffic. The third stage is actually definitely from 10 to 100. I think at least during this stage, it should be generative AI to be launched in every application.
So these are the practical applications Kao Chen also spoke about that are the focus of China's AI development. Making AI models more efficient and accessible enough to be integrated in a vast number of diverse, smaller, and domain-specific products and services. And China, with the world's largest consumer and manufacturing base, is believed to be excel in this application phase. Some people are saying we are pretty close to AGI.
To be honest, I don't think we're very close to AGI.
As most listeners will know, AGI stands for Artificial General Intelligence.
So far, we haven't heard about any fundamental breakthrough related to any high-end, so-called high-end business. For example, like healthcare, like cancer treatment. We haven't heard a really fundamental breakthrough yet.
And the reason for that, you argue, isn't lack of smart models, but a problem of data accessibility.
Those unicorn startups, for example, like OpenAI, Thinking Machine Lab, DeepSeek, actually, they all use the data that are crawled from the general web. But for those high-end business, for example, like hospital, cancer treatment, those data cannot be crawled from the general web at all. For example, like DeepSeek, they use like a 20 terabyte of the data for the knowledge injection from the general web. For example, if you're collaborating with hospitals, they have petabytes of data.
1 petabyte of data is equivalent to 1,000 terabytes of data.
So that means actually, if you really want to make fundamental breakthrough related to AGI, that I think at least can act like a real doctor, right? At least you have to consume that much data. But those data cannot be consumed from the general web. So the current model is far from AGI, in my opinion.
That brings us to what you call the last mile of generative AI. You are moving away from the Silicon Valley approach of building a centralized model based on the general web. Instead, your team and others are pursuing a decentralized model. Can you explain that shift?
If you're working with a top hospital, if you still rely on the current centralization mechanism, that means you have to cluster all the data, all the computing resources in one place. I'm sure you probably heard about one company called the Thinking Machine Lab. That was founded.
That's a former CTO of OpenAI.
Yes, or Mira, right?
Yeah.
And they're actually working on a similar thing as what we're currently working on, so-called decentralized generative AI. Just to tackle such question, those high-end local data cannot be crawled from the general web. How shall we really train a model to cluster all the data that we should use, especially those high-end data are kept private? How shall we solve that problem? So we are probably given, in my opinion, a better solution to achieve AGI to be launched in practice in such applications. So what we are currently working on, for example, like for each of the hospital, we train the model local. We never let the data move out because this is really very hard. The data is humongous. The hospital probably do a great job of the data privacy, but moving the data from their hospital, they have to spend quite a lot of money. So that's impossible in practice. So our solution is to train a model local.
So this decentralized generative AI approach may solve the data access problem of high-end private sectors while protecting sensitive information like patient data, because the data is processed at or near the source where it is generated, rather than sent to a central cloud or data center. But Professor Yang, this so-called edge processing does not solve the chip shortage problem, which seems fundamental to China's AI development.
Actually, we're also working on something very appealing as well. That is low-bit training. So what does that mean? Low-bit training means FP8.
FP stands for floating point, and FP8 is a calculation format that uses only 8 bits or a short string of ones and zeros to store numerical data in the model. Most models use 16 bits.
To the extreme extent, that means if every parameter I use FP8, the other company use FP16, that means I save around 50% of the computing resources as well as memory storage resources. So that's what we are currently working to tackle such computing resource challenges.
That is an enormous saving, 50% of computing resources, simply through software innovation.
But to be honest, low-bit training will be the future.
What Professor Yang is doing with FP8 training shows a fundamental shift. If you cannot outspend your rival on chips, you must out-engineer them on algorithms or architecture. So, Professor Yang, you mentioned, the 3 stages, and you said we are now from the 10 to 100. So is that your vision, creating AI agents for every hospital, every individual, every school, every small business? Is that what you envision for the future of AI?
Now, from 10 to 100, we focus quite a lot of applications and other models development, like DeepSeek, Qwen, my previous team. So in my opinion, from a technical perspective, I really respect U.S. investment and development of the generative AI. I always tell other people, all those AI people should thank OpenAI. We should respect all these contributions by U.S. companies like Google and OpenAI, because they brought such opening for this big generation of AI.
And should the U.S. also be thankful to China in a way?
Yeah, I think so. So, because we have really, to be honest, we have many applications. I think China's production performs better because we have quite a lot of consumers, right? So that's the truth. For example, like TikTok, right? So this is a very good production. And in that sense, we are very experienced, like in China, in the production, right? So that's a very good collaboration way, in my opinion. So again, from a technical perspective, I really want all the technical people worldwide can collaborate. So that's the best way to move this technology to move fast.
Before DeepSeek, the view was that the US represented the only true source of AI power. But China is now showing that it can provide a powerful alternative AI system. Why is DeepSeek so successful?
in my opinion, it focuses purely on the technical development. It doesn't put too much efforts on, for example, like commercialization. I think that's probably one of the most important reasons they currently really develop some very good technique.
So you are saying the commercialization pressure, you have to answer to your investors. This is actually a burden for an AI startup.
Yes, I think so. All those VCs, sometimes I try to educate them. You have to have some patience.
Thank you, Professor Yan, for joining our podcast and illuminating such a complex topic.
Well, to be honest, this is my first time in this such experiences, and probably I'm in a very serious sharing of my technical sharing. So again, I hope the audience can understand from my technical delivery.
For my final question, though, let's look at the global landscape. The US and China are clearly the two dominant players today. Do you foresee a situation where most AI models will originate from these two nations?
I probably will believe so. Yeah, these two countries work hard, and they are the most top talents people. And from a technical perspective, for example, like my company, we open source everything. This is a fundamental technical revolutionization. I really want all those people can collaborate with each other, because that's the best way we can develop some technology to really achieve AGI for sure in the future.
As the US and China solidify their dominance in AI, I asked Kao Chen, the researcher at Princeton University, a follow-up question related to this. How do third-party countries navigate the choice between the US-led and the China-led technological ecosystems?
I think we're already starting to see some interesting mix and match approaches for third countries, whether you're talking about Southeast Asia or the Middle East, or I'm thinking about the rise of even Chinese AI models in Japan or in parts of Africa, or even in Silicon Valley itself. I mean, there was recently news about Airbnb using Alibaba's Qwen series. So the current state of things seems like one where countries are kind of picking and choosing, maybe using NVIDIA chips for hardware where they can, or using a sort of fine-tuned or customized version of a Chinese open source AI model on top of that. One big question mark for me will be, as I watch all this unfold, will be how much pressure does the US or China try to apply to these third countries when it comes to choosing their AI tech stack? It will be very, very tough for those countries, because ultimately they do business with both the US and China. They rely on both heavily for technology. They may not have their own separate alternatives. And so they'll be put in an increasingly difficult position, I think, going forward.
You are based on the US East Coast, right? When you talk about China tech to people in Washington, what's the biggest takeaway you hope they learn about China's technological progress?
It's still shocking to me how so many people in Washington, especially people who are in positions of power, continue to have what I think are outdated views or inaccurate views of what's happening in China. One of the biggest things I try to highlight is just explaining, what's really happening, both the positives and the negatives. What does China's model really look like? Is there such a thing as like a China model? And with that better understanding, then we can think about how, say, the US might respond from a policy perspective. How might we compete with China while at the same time recognizing that we are part of this very, very deeply interconnected global economic and technological system.
Okay, so Kyle told me the AI game isn't just about large language models anymore. It's about the whole package: chips, algorithms, and applications. And we also heard Professor Yang talk about her team's FP8 low-bit training, looking to save energy and costs. China seems to be in a race of its own, pushing the tech envelope on many levels and setting the global pace.
There are just so many cool things happening in tech right now. I just think whether you're talking about the latest wearables, like these sort of like smart glasses, or you're talking about just to sit in a self-driving car, or now China's efforts to create flying taxis, flying cars. I mean, I just think that we're at this really, really fascinating moment in time. And I think this is really the point where it's not just about China catching up in some of these older traditional industries, but now really pushing the envelope for areas that many, many countries now are trying to innovate on at the cutting edge.
Professor Yang argued that innovation may lead to a decentralized AI future, where every hospital, every family, and every small business will have its own AI model. With her startup InfyX.ai, which was valued at $250 million after its initial round of funding, her mission is to build the last mile of generative AI.
We want to enable those different institutions to have their domain-specific models with the least computing resources as well as storage resources. So in that sense, they can revolutionize their business.
The rules of the tech race are clearly being rewritten. We are seeing the open-source Chinese AI models, like the DeepSeek series, focus on algorithm innovations rather than brute force hardware scaling. And we are likely to see the release of even more advanced Chinese models. We are also seeing a shift from AI as a colossal centralized power to a more accessible utility that can be tailored to the specific needs of China's vast, fragmented, and highly vertical economy. The uptake of AI applications has already rapidly increased across China. This momentum is not likely to stop anytime soon, and it also got a boost from the release of Beijing's AI Plus strategy. Launched in August 2025, China's roadmap for AI seeks to integrate the technology across manufacturing, agriculture, and services. It is a mix of strategic intent as well as big investment from both the state and private sectors that is defining what we are calling China's After DeepSeek era. Next time, we break down the forces driving China's AI development and discuss the competitive capital advantage of the US versus the energy edge that China holds.
You have been listening to part 2 of a South China Morning Post TechCast. To read more in-depth reporting on China's tech revolution, visit our website, scmp.com.
And please subscribe to this podcast series wherever you get your podcasts.